Shivers, The Enchanted Attic by M.D. Spencer. Chapter 13. The deep and mournful music echoed through Nicole's soul as she explored the study. She had not heard it again since the night, a week ago, when it had scared her into the corner. But the tune had burned itself into her brain. She could not get rid of it. Her heart felt heavy in her chest from the sadness of the melody. She had decided to enter the attic alone, if she could find a way in. There was no reason to get Casey involved. This was serious business. Nicole considered how she herself had already been affected. Her stomach trouble, her poor performance at school, her worried parents. Casey was doing well in school, even if she did brag about it too much. There was no need to ruin that. No need to scare a little kid. Besides being scary, this might actually be dangerous. Casey was fined for exploring dark passageways where you might find spiders or slimy things. But since there was the possibility of running into ghosts, and this was the first time Nicole had allowed herself to think of that possibility, this was no job for a 7-year-old. Nicole had sat in her room for hours, trying to think of a way to get into the attic. No good ideas had come to her. She finally decided that investigating and thinking might be more useful than just sitting and thinking. She had begun her investigation in the study, for obvious reasons. The entrance to the passageway was hidden here. Whoever's study this had been, so many years ago, must have had the passageway built here for a reason. Maybe he or she had left behind some clues about how to get into the attic. Nicole stood in the middle of the gloomy room, looking it over from top to bottom. The thick red velvet curtains blocked so much light that it took a minute for her eyes to adjust to the darkness. She scanned the thousands of leather-bound volumes lining the bookshelves from floor to ceiling. She looked at the ladder leaning against one of the bookshelves, and at the huge dark wooden desk that dominated the room. Her first thought was that maybe there was another passageway. Perhaps it led into the attic by a different route. And maybe the door at the top of those stairs had been left unlocked. She tugged on one book after another. Each slipped out from its space on the shelf, sending a cloud of dust upon her nose and making her want to sneeze. She wiped her nose on her sleeve. This was no time to go off in search of a tissue. She was determined. Nothing was going to stop her, least of all a runny nose. After trying books on each of the lower shelves, she tried those that were higher. She moved the ladder from one bookshelf to another, trying books on all 4 sides of the great gloomy room. But all the books she tried turned out to be, in fact, real books. She could find no secret passageway other than the one she and her sister had already explored. Nicole paused. It was time for a little more thought and a little less investigation. She wiped her forehead with one sleeve and her nose with the other. Again, she looked around the room, more closely this time. An enormous painting hung on the wall behind the desk. A painting so huge that it was surprising she had not noticed it before. Perhaps she had missed it because it was so dark and gloomy that it blended in with the rest of the room. It was a portrait of an elderly man. He had a thick head of white hair and a drooping white mustache. He wore a dark suit, accented by a gold watch chain, which dangled across his stomach. He wore wire-rimmed spectacles, and behind them, his eyes seemed to be angry, ferocious, and sad all at once. He seemed to be looking straight at Nicole. She walked slowly across the room. By some trick of the painter, the old man's eyes seemed to follow her as she walked. She stepped closer. She saw now that the portrait had been painted in this very room. The man was standing in front of the great dark wooden desk. Behind him were the ceiling-to-floor bookshelves, lined with leather-bound volumes. Maybe that was why the painting had blended into the room, Nicole thought, because it was itself a picture of the very same room. Suddenly it struck her. What a fiendishly clever way to hide something. Behind a painting so big, you couldn't fail to notice it, except that you did. Maybe something was behind it, she thought. The entrance to a passageway, or a vault full of old papers, or perhaps even pictures of the people who used to live in this house. Nicole stepped closer. The man in the painting glared at her. Slowly, she reached out and touched a corner of the great gold frame that surrounded the painting. Her heart beating fast, she grasped the frame and inched it out away from the wall. Holding her breath, she bent her head close to the wall and peered behind the painting. There was nothing there.